ladies and gentlemen, without coffee, there will be no decisions made or attention paid. So I appreciate that thing. You suffer from that terrible condition of pro-caffeination. When I mentioned that Tammy Milner from Devonport Council was here, I probably should have mentioned that Launceston City Council's here too. And no doubt there's probably another council. Is someone here from Meander, Valley? Three of us? Three from Meander. Where's Meander too, sir? Fantastic. Great to see you all coming. Is it exciting? Do you find it like revolutionary and changing? Going there?
And another one,
Kentish? That's yours too. There's been an amalgamation, oh no! Yes, it's great. And Kentish, of course, supported us for the function this week too. So thank you to the councillors for turning up. But also saw young Rod Houston here, I think, from Sustainability Tasmania Club. Yes, nice to see you too. And Dick Friend. Dick and I think, worked at the Aberfeldy 29 years ago. Dick doesn't look any older. Dick does. So this is the section of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, where the big heavy hitters come to the stage and speak about the vision and the future and the state of play. And I know that there'll be some questions raised and some teeth gnashed, but have no fear. This is quite an incredible first address. The global state of play. Please welcome the Project Officer from ClimateWorks, Sarah Fumei.
Okay, so thanks very much for having me come to speak with you today. I'm very honoured to be talking alongside colleagues from the Electric Vehicle Council, the Australian Electric Vehicle Association and the Tasmanian Government. So just to give you a bit of a rundown of ClimateWorks in case you're not familiar with us, we were founded in 2009 by the Maya Foundation and Monash University, who saw the need to establish an organisation that could provide a bridge between academic research on climate and action. So we work with government and business to drive Australia's transition towards net zero emissions. So, as part of our work looking at how Australia can get to net zero emissions, we found that the transport sector is really important. Transport is one of our fastest growing emission sectors, but it's also one that provides really low cost emissions reduction opportunities. And one opportunity for reducing emissions in transport is through improving the efficiency of internal combustion engine vehicles. And the federal government is currently looking at this. It's considering implementing vehicle emission standards. However, at the same time, we know that just improving the efficiency of internal combustion engine vehicles is not going to be enough to get Australia to net zero emissions. We actually need to electrify our vehicle fleet. So that's what led to our work in this space, and we've been working with the Electric Vehicle Council to provide advice to government about electric vehicle policy. So to start off today, I'm going to talk to you about global rates of electric vehicle uptake. So this chart is showing, so it's from the International Energy Agency's Global EV Outlook paper, and it's showing how global uptake of electric vehicles have changed over time. So we're now on 753,000 vehicles sold in 2016, which was a 40% increase from 2015. And there are now more than 2 million electric vehicles on the road. Up until 2015, the United States was the largest electric vehicle market in the world. However, China has now taken on that mantle and has roughly a third of all of the electric vehicle sales in the world in 2016. In addition to this momentum we're seeing in sales, we're also seeing momentum in policy. So, as was mentioned earlier, we've had the governments from France, Germany, India, Norway, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom and Scotland all say that they're planning to phase out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles. We've also had similar commitments from 10 states and provinces in the United States and Canada. And China has also said that it's planning to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles, although it hasn't provided a date yet. We're also seeing momentum from manufacturers. So, for example, Volvo has said that from 2019, every new vehicle it launches will have a battery. So it'll be a battery electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid or a hybrid. So that was that was the number of sales of electric vehicles. If you look at market share, it tells a slightly different story. So this is the percentage of electric vehicle sales, or percentage of vehicle sales in each country that are electric. And you can see that Norway is far and away leading the pack on 28.8%. And China, even though has the largest electric vehicle market in the world, is still lower in the market share on 1.4%. And you can see Australia is somewhat further down the rankings on 0.1%.
Was that rounded up as well?
I guess 0.12. So there were 1,369 electric vehicles sold in Australia in 2016, and I think Roy is going to be speaking a little bit more about what are the barriers to improving the, to why we've got that low uptake level. So that was electric vehicles. We can also look at how charging infrastructure is being taken up across the world. So this is a chart showing the number of publicly accessible charging stations installed in different countries. And you can see that it's growing massively. It's increased by 72% between 2015 and 2016. And most of that growth has actually been driven by rapid installation of fast chargers in China. So the number of fast chargers in China grew 7-fold between 2015 and 2016 to reach more than 90,000 in 2016. And that's a large portion of the total number of publicly accessible chargers in China of 141,000. So this is another IEA chart, so International Energy Agency. Separately, the International Council on Clean Transportation has been doing a bit of work looking at different countries and jurisdictions and how the ratio of electric vehicles on the road to electric vehicle chargers compares. And they found that it's really variable. So in places like California, there's really good access to private and workplace charging. And so the ratio is about 25 to 30 vehicles for every publicly accessible charger. In comparison, in places like Norway and the Netherlands, it's about 2 to 7 vehicles per charger, and in China it's about 3 to 6. So they've concluded that there's no optimum level of number of cars per charger. It really depends on varying population density and urban planning throughout the world. So publicly accessible charging is one thing. Private charging infrastructure has been growing even more. So you can see from this chart that we've actually got 2 million chargers in total in comparison to the 300,000 publicly accessible chargers. So most of those chargers are private. And I think this indicates that lots of the charging that we're seeing is still happening at home or in the workplace. So as we're ClimateWorks, we really care about the emissions outcomes of electric vehicles. So this chart is showing some electric vehicle projections, and I'll run you through it because it has some interesting implications for climate change. So this works. All right, so this blue line down here is historical uptake of electric vehicles. And you can see it's still pretty low on about 2 million. Now, this orange line is how we expect electric vehicle sales to change in the future based on current policy and rates of technology improvement. This grey line was a commitment made by, or a call made by a bunch of NGOs and companies at the Paris United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, who wanted 20% electric vehicle uptake by, I think, 2020 or 2025. And then these green lines are electric vehicle uptake rates that are actually aligned with limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees, which is what countries committed to do at Paris. Interestingly, these black lines are what vehicle manufacturers have said they expect electric vehicle sales to be in particular years. So you can see that it's a bit higher than what we're expecting based on current policy projections. But either way, you'd think that based on current policy, electric vehicle sales would be somewhere in this region. And you can see that it's well below where we need them to be consistent with 2 degrees of warming. So obviously we need to do more to encourage electric vehicle uptake. So what's stopping us from getting to a scenario consistent with 2 degrees? So the International Council on Clean Transportation has found that there are 3 major barriers to electric vehicle uptake, and they're pretty much the same across the world. So one is cost and model availability. So even though electric vehicles have lower operating costs, they still generally have higher capital costs than a standard internal combustion engine vehicle. Recharging concerns. Even where we know that most people are charging their cars at home, people are still worried about the range of the vehicles and whether there's publicly accessible charging infrastructure. And third, consumer awareness. Even where people are really interested in purchasing an electric vehicle, if they actually try and go out and make that purchasing decision, there's often not a lot of information and support available to them. And the International Council on Clean Transportation has found that countries and governments that implement policies to address each of these 3 barriers have achieved higher rates of electric vehicle uptake. So I'm going to run through 3 governments and countries with high rates of electric vehicle uptake and talk about the different policies they have. So we're going to go through California, Norway, and China. Pretty neat though. Alright, so we're going to start with Norway. So as we mentioned earlier, Norway is the global leader in terms of electric vehicle market share at 28.8%, which has really improved a lot from 1.3% in 2011. And Norway has policies in place to address each of those barriers we just spoke about. So there are financial incentives in place, including exemption from value-added tax and a reduction in registration tax. This makes a nickel leaf, for example, about $8,000 cheaper than it would be without the incentives. There's also policies in place to address consumer awareness. So there's a government electric vehicle advice website. The ICCT also points to the importance of strong electric vehicle enthusiast groups like you guys, and public exposure to EVs through government and company fleets. Norway is also doing really well in terms of public charging infrastructure. So you can see that on the chart there, Norway, in terms of per capita charging infrastructure, and the Netherlands are pretty much way outpacing everyone else. And that's been due to fairly sustained investment from the federal and state government, city governments. So there's been federal investment in charging infrastructure since about 2009, when they spent about €6 million, and that's been increasing since then. And there's also been strong support from cities and towns. So for example, Oslo budgeted €2 million for the initial rollout of charging infrastructure in 2011. On to California. California is a leading United States state on electric vehicle uptake, and you can see that from the chart on the right. So the chart is showing electric vehicle sales in California in the blue, and then the rest of the US is in the yellow and the green. So you can see that even though it's just a state, it's making up a really large portion of electric vehicle sales in the US. And California also has policies in place to address each of the 3 barriers we've discussed. There is a subsidy it provides on top of the federal government subsidy. So it provides $2,500 for the sale, a rebate of $2,500 for the sale of an electric vehicle. And this has been in place since 2010. And so we've seen the results in that the uptake of EVs in California is 4 times the rate in the rest of the US. And there are around 20 EV models available in California in comparison to an average of 7 in the rest of the US. Charging infrastructure. So California also has policies in place to address this. So in California, electricity utility providers are able to install charging infrastructure and then include that in the way that they charge their consumers for electricity. They've also got a plan to, or they've developed a tool that predicts how many different types of chargers they're going to need based on the rate of electric vehicle uptake to 2025 in each county, so that they can then plan for that. And they also have consumer awareness policies. So they have ride and drive days, zero emissions vehicle action plan, and a comprehensive electric vehicle advice website. They also have really strong government fleet requirements, where fleets are required to purchase a certain number of electric vehicles for their fleets, which is a useful way to increase community exposure to the vehicles. And finally, we have China. So even though, as we discussed, the market share in China is still relatively low, the actual number of vehicles sold is just massive. And in particular parts of China, that market share is much higher. So there's a couple of overarching policies in China that are influencing electric vehicle uptake. So there's going to be a requirement on automakers to produce 12% new energy vehicles by 2020, which is likely going to require annual EV sales of over 1 million by 2020. And as we discussed, they've also indicated that they're going to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles. There's financial incentives in place which address that cost and model availability barrier. So there's acquisition and excise tax exemption, and then there's also exemptions from license plate restrictions in major urban centres, and access to bus lanes, and some free charging and parking as well. And then in terms of charging infrastructure, you can see that China has a massive share of the world's charging infrastructure. So 25% of publicly available slow chargers are in China, and 81% of publicly available fast chargers are in China. And so this is based on some support from the government, so funded by the central government. 88 pilot cities are required to have one charge point for every 8 electric vehicles, and there's no gaps of greater than 1 kilometre between stations. It's a different approach. And so they're planning to have 120,000 fast chargers and 500,000 total chargers publicly accessible by 2020. And finally, they also do a lot for consumer awareness. So they've got an EV demonstration zone in Shanghai, which has really helped improve consumer awareness. They have a large ride and drive facility, test drive facility where you can test drive 55 different electric vehicles on a professional track. And they've had 130,000 visitors to that centre so far.
Just quickly, what does fast mean in this context?
I think it's just AC/DC.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so wrapping up, global electric vehicle uptake and charging infrastructure deployment are increasing rapidly. Current policies are not sufficient to encourage electric vehicle uptake consistent with limiting global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. We found that across the world there are 3 major barriers to electric vehicle uptake: model availability and cost, charging concerns, and consumer awareness. And countries that implement policies to address these barriers have much better rates of electric vehicle uptake. So that's it from me. I'll hand back over. Thank you.
Sarah, we'd like you to accept this gift of lactose-free and vegan chocolates from Deanne. Thank you too. Great talk.